Demand is the want and willingness of consumers to purchase a good or service at a given price. So if you want to buy a video game and you can afford it, that means you have demand for that video game. A demand curve has two axes, price shown with P and quantity demanded shown with Q. Quantity demanded is the amount of goods or services consumers are willing and able to buy. Law of demand tells us that as price decreases, demand increases, which leads to an extension of demand. So a clothing firm decides to go on a sale to get rid of the excess supply of clothes. This causes the consumers to have more demand for their clothes. However, as price increases, demand falls. This leads to a contraction of demand. Apple decides to raise the price of their iPhones. This leads to a decrease in demand. Contraction and extension of demand are affected by price only. They both lead to a movement along the curve. Demand shifters lead to a fall or rise in demand. There are non-price factors that shift the curve to the left or right. Popularity of a product affects demand. If a good suddenly becomes more popular or fashionable, consumers will have more demand for it. This will shift the demand curve to the right. If the population increases, there will be more demand for products. In a family, if there are 2 people, you'll only need 1 loaf of bread, but if there were like 5 people, you would need more. Taxes may affect demand. If the government sets less taxes, consumers will have more disposable income left to spend on goods and services. Global factors also affect demand. In winter, demand for ice cream would be less than the demand for ice cream in summer. If a newer version of a product is released, consumers will have less demand for the older product. If a good or service is advertised less, then consumers will have less demand for it. Individual demand is the demand of one consumer, while the market demand is the demand of all consumers. Firms decide whether if they should produce more of a product or not by looking into the market demand curves. This is also how price mechanism works. Complementary goods are goods that complete each other. They're in a joint demand, which means if you have demand for one, you'll also have demand for the other good. So if the demand for toothpaste rises, demand for toothbrush will also rise. Substitute are goods and services that can replace each other. A rise in the price of a good may lead to a rise in demand for the substitute of it. Generally, as their income rises, consumers have more demand for goods. These goods are normal goods. But if your demand for a good falls as your income rises, that's an inferior good.